Welcome to my fourth video blog. I'd like to apologise in advance for my poor presentation skills, made even worse than usual by a stinking cold. Civilisation, an evolutionary cul-de-sac? Question mark. I put this as a rhetorical question in order to offer an affirmative answer. If I'm right, and I'm pretty sure that I am, the implications could hardly be more profound, or our recognition of them more urgent. It is not an easy thing to recognise, given that it involves the environment in which we have been totally immersed since birth, are completely familiar with and dependent on, and the fact that our brains evolved to try and maintain the environment it depends on, especially when it has been particularly successful within it. As anyone who is anyone in society invariably has been. Understandably, the more successful someone is, the less inclined they are to question the political and socio-economic environment that facilitated it. Thus, the difficulty in recognising the inherent flaws and non-sustainability of the artificial environment we call civilization, and the evolutionary cul-de-sac it represents. In addition to our dependency on the socio-economic status quo, there is also the mind-boggling progress of science and technology, which doesn't just distract us from, but also blinds us to its fundamental flaws, which, unless corrected, will, I am convinced, lead to the demise of Western civilization in this new 21st century, just as they came close to doing in the 20th century, with the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, and the threat of nuclear self-annihilation. We have to trick our brains into recognising what it doesn't want to recognise, by applying Darwinian logic to our understanding of it, and to our understanding of human nature and the social, political and economic power structures, that is, the civilization, it has, over the centuries, given rise and shape to. Given the evolutionary origins of human nature, this is the only logical approach to take, but it has been barred to us for more than half a century by taboos, an overreaction to initial attempts at a Darwinian approach, which went horribly wrong, leading to the misconceived notions of social Darwinism and their barbaric extension and implementation by the Nazis. Europe was quickly freed from Nazi occupation, but even now, almost 70 years after their military defeat, they continue to occupy a number of fundamentally important ideas, which they embraced, exploited, abused, and discredited, to such an extent that people feared even thinking about them again. About the importance of race, for example, for one's sense of personal and group, i.e. national identity, about eugenics, euthanasia, nationalism, and of course its combination with socialism, which the Nazis took and have retained complete possession of, by incorporating it into their very name of National Socialism, and about Darwin when applied to politics and human society. These fears were in turn exploited by others who came after the Nazis to personal and power political advantage, and consolidated into current ideology and taboos, surrounding and restricting or preventing completely access to and free discussion of these ideas by those seeking to claim a spurious moral authority for themselves on the back of Nazism and the horrors that it produced. Anyone wanting to pursue a career in politics, the media, the church, academia, etc., especially the social sciences, must abide by them, just as in the past people had to abide by church ideology and taboos. Evolution adapted human nature, our emotions, motivations, behaviour patterns, etc., notwithstanding the enormous plasticity of the latter, to the natural and very tribal environment that existed long before the advent of civilization and the state, which now conflates and confounds three very different aspects of this original tribal environment, posing as our original tribe or nation, that is, our intra- and inter-tribal environment, while at the same time facilitating society's self-exploitation to the extent of its self-betrayal and ultimately self-destruction as an extra-tribal environment. This is what I mean by the perverted Darwinian nature of civilization, the basic unit of which is the state, and why I judge it to represent an evolutionary cul-de-sac. It is an insight that can only be obtained from a Darwinian perspective, which, contrary to those seeking to maintain the taboos, has nothing to do with misconceived notions of a ruthless struggle for survival and domination between races or nations. The human brain evolved to interpret and rationalize reality, that is, its environment, particularly its social environment, within certain constraints, of course, to its own narrow and short-sighted advantage. This includes social scientists, who are not nearly as objective as they would have us, and themselves, no doubt, believe. They rationalise reality like everyone else to suit themselves and what is expected of them, observing certain taboos that are required of them. In our original tribal environment, this must have served well enough to ensure the survival of one's tribe or nation, which I assume to be the natural, basic units of human evolution. Well enough. But not anymore. Not since the different aspects of our original tribal environment were conflated and confounded by the state, which organises and regulates society to serve the personal, narrow and short-sighted self-interest of its elites or their clients, rather than the interests and long-term survival of society at large. The tobacco industry provides a particularly clear example of society's self-exploitation and self-destructiveness, with individual companies behaving like tribes and the industry as a whole like a nation, ruthlessly pursuing their interests in selling tobacco products, despite their known harmfulness to society at large, which they viewed as their extra-tribal environment, there primarily to be exploited. It was this particularly blatant example of what I refer to as the insanities of normality, which set me on the path to discovering the cause in society's perverted Darwinian nature. Gradually, and very hesitatingly, the state did take action to restrict this self-harming, but only after decades of struggle and untold harm done to human lives for the sake of one industry's financial gain, one of whose employees and advocates was and still is an eminent and right honourable Member of Parliament, as well as of the current British government. As I say, this is an example, not an exception, of how the state and the economy it provides the legal framework for work in facilitating society's self-exploitation, self-harming, self-betrayal, and ultimately self-destruction. to be continued in part 2.